Tevin Jenkins is back at Chicago Bears training camp, competing again to maybe try and start on this offensive line. And apparently we're just supposed to act like nothing happened and everything is fine.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're on the YouTube channel as well. Appreciate you tuning in to Locked On Bears. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more odds, props, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. On the show today, we are going to get into the return of Teven Jenkins back at Chicago Bears practice. We will hear from the second-round pick on the offensive line in his own words, well, some of his own words on what exactly happened. He didn't really say what happened, but we'll just kind of hear how he's handling the situation. A little tense, a little bit awkward, a little bit uncomfortable in there. We'll kind of look at what we've learned about his situation, what we know, what we don't know, and then what that means for this Bears offensive line. Offensive coordinator Luke Getsy, we'll hear from him on the show today as well about how up in the air this offensive line still is, and now where Teven Jenkins is battling at multiple positions, not just multiple sides, but also multiple positions. And we'll catch up more largely on a slew of injuries across this Bears roster right now. None or not very many all that serious, but just giving a lot of new guys a lot of different opportunities, including potentially Tevin Jenkins, a fast track perhaps to find more starting opportunities here. We'll kind of see how things are going to play out from here. But for now, the trade that seemed imminent no longer seems imminent, and Teven Jenkins is recovered, maybe, from whatever it is the Bears claim was holding him back. Now, the reports had been perhaps that there had been a disagreement among him with the coaching staff, which he denied, and then the Bears as a team just kept saying he was working through something with the trainers. They never said specifically that, implying that it was an injury, but they never said specifically what he's been working through or what type of injury or whatever situation it's been. They've been very mum about it. And Teven Jenkins met with the media and kind of had an opportunity to set some of the records straight and declined to do so on a lot of fronts and made for just sort of kind of tense, awkward back and forth where he just didn't really want to talk about everything and just wants to sort of pick back up where we thought he was going to start from.
Tevin, where you been the last 10 days or so? What have you been dealing with?
I've been in the training room trying to get better, just health-wise, and I've been in there ever since I've been out after the first day of training camp.
What specifically have you been?
I don't want to disclose that right now.
Can you say whether your back is good or if that's...
I'm not going to disclose that right now. That's all.
What have you thought about reports and some of the talk about you that the team is trying to trade you, that you're not happy? What can you add to that, or what do you want to say about that?
Just in general, I'm here for Chicago Bears right now. I'm here to play football for the Chicago Bears, and that's what I want to do, and that's what I plan on doing right now.
He did use the words "right now" in there a few times. I'm a member of the Chicago Bears right now, which is one of those things you read between the lines, like, does right now mean maybe not longer than that? Does that mean it could change in the future? Although later on, and I can't play you the whole press conference, it would take up the podcast, but I encourage you, there was a lot of other good bits in there to get to. Just, have to kind of pick the important parts, and I wanted you to get a feel for some of the awkwardness and some of the tension that goes in there. But he did later say that, he expects to be a Chicago Bear in the regular season, by week one, still expects to be here for week one. He did say that he does want to be here. Part of it was like, well, who wouldn't want to be in Chicago? But more or less said that he wants to be here. Maybe that's just like Of course, that's what he's going to say. He's not going to go in the press conference and demand they trade him and throw some kind of big public fit. So take his word for as much value as you want to at that point. But, he did kind of say that he's currently about 90%, thinks he'll be up to fully 100% in a couple of days here, referring again to some mystery injury. But he wouldn't say whether it was his back again from last year or whether it was anything else. He just kind of said they were keeping him out in the best interest of his health. And, even though he'd like to be back out there and it's kind of pushed them to be back out there, he thinks it's kind of, they're doing what's best for him and his health. The one thing that's interesting that he did say is, like, when talking about being at 90%, he said he's not experiencing any discomfort right now. Discomfort was the word he used. And for me, that sounds like a word you use for your back, right? It's discomfort when you're coming from a back injury. Like, we don't know what it is, but if we think hypothetically, like if he had an ankle sprain or whatever, would you be out there saying we're not having any discomfort now? Probably, but I don't know. I guess I feel like for a lot of injuries, right, it's like no pain would be the word that they would use. It's like, oh yeah, it's not causing me any pain. I'm good to go or whatever. But like discomfort, maybe that's just a biased thing because we know the back has been a thing and maybe I'm looking for it to be the back again. That's why they're being so mysterious about it. But just something about the way he said, like he's not experiencing any discomfort from whatever he's been dealing with right now. Discomfort to me just seems like maybe more of a way you would commonly describe back situations compared to shoulders or knees or ankles. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's me reaching too much. But just the language used there certainly stood out to me there. But it's at least encouraging that, hey, you know what? He's back. He's practicing. He's going to have the opportunity to compete for potentially one of these starting jobs in his roster spot and all that stuff. And like maybe crisis averted. That was one of the criticisms, right? When the trade talks came out, it was like, okay, Bears are looking to shop Teven Jenkins. Yes, it looks bad for Teven Jenkins, but also kind of looks bad on the Bears too if they're not able to work it out with a highly talented player. Right? We know coming out of the draft that he has a lot of talent. It's just about getting it together and getting the opportunities and staying healthy and doing all those things. And if things were breaking down too much behind the scenes, it also looks bad on the Bears and this coaching staff that they can't make it work with this player. And so now it seems like they are able to make it work so far right now with Teven Jenkins. And that's a good reflection on the Bears and the organization and Teven Jenkins right now seemingly getting things back together. Again, he denied having any kind of actual clashes with the coaching staff despite some of the reporting that was out there on that. So we don't know what the deal is. If it's just the back again and he wants to be mysterious about it because, he doesn't want that reputation of having a bad constant back thing or whatever it might be. But Teven Jenkins is back, and that's good for the Chicago Bears and for Teven Jenkins. Good for everyone all around. Win-win to have Teven Jenkins back at practice. Now, all of a sudden, it opens up the offensive line competition even a little bit more. We'll hear from offensive coordinator Luke Getsy on how unsettled things are up front and check in on the multiple positions Teven Jenkins is practicing in and some of the other guys that have been in and out of the lineup next on Locked On Bears. We've all been at a point in our lives when maybe you're a little tight on cash. Money's a little hard to come by. You're waiting for that next paycheck to paycheck kind of a feeling. Maybe you can't fill up your gas tank all the way, but hey, there's no shame in that, and everybody needs a little bit of help sometimes. That's where our friends at Dave can help. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 cash instantly with their program Extra Cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy that wedding gift, catch up on bills, whatever it is. Those expenses that have been stressing you out, you can finally kind of tackle those, get that taken care of without any hangups. There's no interest and there's no credit check needed either. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with Extra Cash. So if you're in a pinch and need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an Extra Cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. This offensive line is still evolving in a lot of different forms. The Bears have tried some very different combinations of players here and there. There's also been some injuries that we'll get into in a little bit here. Nothing too crazy, but just some guys kind of in and out of the lineup, which is good timing then for Tevin Jenkins to be back at practice and being able to fill some of those gaps that are left. It's also been good opportunity for a lot of these rookies that the Bears drafted this season on that offensive line. But at the same time, they're still figuring out what this lineup is going to be, and there's a lot of interchangeability here on the left and the right and different positions here. And it's good to get everybody in that experience, but eventually here the clock starts ticking, and you got to get an offensive line, like a starting group, set. You can still figure out who the backups are going to be at what positions, and say if Teven Jenkins, for example, doesn't end up as a starter, kind of as expected at this point, you still figure out, okay, is he going to play guard? Is he going to play tackle? Can he play either tackle? Is he your swing tackle? You can still work out that stuff later on, but you need to get that offensive line starting five combination here figured out quickly. And it sounds like from offensive coordinator Luke Getsy that they're still maybe pretty far away from figuring out exactly who those best five offensive linemen are going to be.
Where are you in terms of assessing your options for that starting offensive line, and do you see yourself kind of getting closer to solidifying the group you might want to see out there?
No. I think we're still a ways away for a lot of positions, to be honest with you, and that's one of them. We've flipped guys from right to left and up front, and we're trying to see whatever combination makes the most sense and which guys are most flexible for us. So we got a lot of information still to find out. This has been a really good week for us, though. You talk about some guys that have stepped up and, how they're going to react when there's pads in the run game. That's the biggest part. I think that they've done a lot of really good things. So this was a great practice for us, too, because this was the first time we challenged them, like, conditioning-wise. We really went at it today, and I thought that was a really good thing. As we watch the film, that'll be something I'm going to pay attention to see who was, who lost their focus, who lost their discipline and all that stuff when they got challenged today.
A pretty resounding no from Luke Getsy there on the progress in sorting out the offensive line starting combination. And to some extent, that's absolutely what he needs to say and is going to say to keep the competitions as open and intense. As soon as you say okay, this guy's our starter, then the other people who are competing the starter kind of okay, well, I'm not the starter anymore, so maybe you're just not quite pushing it as 100% hard. So to some extent, I think the Bears are in a position where they want to sort of sell that these offensive line combinations are not set and are very much up in the air. And we've talked before about how on paper, I feel like we kind of know generally who the main guys are. I mean, the offensive tackle spots are definitely still up in the air, but we know Cody Whitehair is the left guard. We know when he returns from his thumb surgery, Lucas Patrick will be the starting center. You can still call it an open competition between Sam Mustipher and Doug Kramer and Dieter Iserland to be, the true backup center and the one who might start in Lucas Patrick's place when he's not available to go. But okay, we know those two spots. And then there's still an open competition at right guard between the veteran that they signed, Michael Schofield from the Chargers. I think Ja'Tyre Carter, the 7th-round pick, is still rotating in that spot. And now at practice, since returning in a limited rep, he's still ramping up, Teven Jenkins is. Teven Jenkins has practiced some at right guard. I believe it was with the third team at right guard, but still sprinkling him in between right guard, right tackle, and left tackle. And he got some, essentially what you would consider starters reps at right tackle in that rotation with Justin Fields, with some of the other offensive linemen out there. So Teven Jenkins is not out of the mix by any means at right guard. And the right guard spot is in no way, guaranteed to Michael Schofield, but, the 30 or 31-year-old, however old he is, right guard who's been a long-time starter in the NFL, probably going to win that competition. And I would think in the minds of the coaching staff, they probably know that too. They're not going to say that. They're going to make sure the players think it's totally wide open. But they probably know in the back of their minds that, yeah, Schofield's probably going to be the starting right guard as long as he's healthy and participating and all that stuff. Same kind of thing for Riley Reiff, right? They sign him, they pay him a contract with a bunch of incentives that some easy to reach, some not, but big offensive tackle signing right at the start of training camp. I think the coaching staff knows in the back of their mind, Riley Reiff is going to be one of your starting offensive tackles. Maybe they don't know whether it's left tackle or right tackle, but a long time 5, 6, 7, 8 year starter at offensive tackle is probably not going to get beat out fully by some combination of Braxton Jones, Larry Borum, or maybe, just maybe, Tevin Jenkins. So realistically, you do know 4 of the 5 starters. You might not know exactly where they're going to be on the offensive line, but like Riley Reef will either be the left tackle, the right tackle, and your 3 interior guys, we probably are pretty sure who those 3 are going to be. So then really it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, is Reef left or right? Or more so like, who's your 5th best offensive lineman? Like if Braxton Jones is your 5th best offensive lineman, then Reef will play right tackle. It's not a matter of whether or not Reef is better on the left or right side, but it's more so like, who's their next best option and where does that 5th best player best fit on the offensive line? Will it be Larry Borum at right tackle or Braxton Jones at left tackle? That's what it feels like right now. Teven Jenkins can come in there and unseat one of them and be that other starter. Absolutely. That's still an open competition on this offensive line. But like they're rotating in Jatir Carter at right guard, Zachary Thomas at left guard, Doug Kramer at center. And like you can, and even Sean Coleman got some left tackle reps as well. We haven't talked about him much this offseason. And so you can call it an open contest, an open competition, but like it's kind of, it's more so to push those guys. That's what it feels like to me than truly saying, oh, we don't know who could be on this offensive line. It's like, okay, the 2 veterans you signed before training camp that have been longtime starters, you didn't sign them to be backups. You know, you signed them because, hey, they're going to push these guys and probably going to start. So like, to that extent, I'm not concerned about them being able to find a starting lineup, but you got to get them in place sooner rather than later here and kind of establish like, yeah, okay, those are going to be the guys and here's where they're going to be, so they can have as much practice time as possible together to learn each other, the muscle memory, the cohesion, the quarterback, all the different calls, and how that's all going to function on this offensive line. The center injury for Lucas Patrick certainly affects things there because it'll be a different guy come most of the regular season, but that one you can't do anything about right now. So at least if you can get the other guys solidified and then Patrick can kind of join in an already fairly solidified group, the more you can do to help congeal things a little bit better, the better. Problem is there's been injuries at a lot of these different spots to where you can't necessarily get guys going. Now I think we're up to like 3 different wide receivers with injuries right now. The Bears scraping the bottom of the barrel a little bit at that position as well. Cornerback has some guys missing practice. We'll check in on some of the injuries and some of the unheralded players stepping up into bigger opportunities right now that maybe could help them play into 53-man roster spots. Is a little bit of a surprise here. Next on Locked On Bears. Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. Still got some time before the regular season here to get your bets in on your Chicago Bears. The win total over under 6.5. Odds to make the playoffs are a fairly big long shot. Week 1 lines against the San Francisco 49ers. Player performances this season. You can bet on how many yards Justin Fields, Darnell Mooney, David Montgomery, etc. are going to have this season, and so many more ways to play with BetOnline. You can find reviews and news for every league, not just the Bears and the NFL, but Major League Baseball season in the home stretch here. You got futures on basketball and hockey as well. They got combat sports going on all the time, golf, soccer, tennis, esports, live in-game betting, you name it. BetOnline is your top resource for all the sports wagering information you need. Head on over to BetOnline today to use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. The injuries have started all over this Chicago Bears roster, and there's been also a combination of some veteran days off in there that have given guys opportunities, but it sounds like most of the guys rotating in and out are not missing with anything super serious, but it's still something to keep an eye on here. So the big one that happened over the weekend was Byron Pringle. He is out with what's being described as a quad injury by Matt Eberflus, and there's no current timetable for his return. Most of the rest of the players are just considered day-to-day with minor things. You know, like Velus Jones Jr. also left practice with an injury that they haven't really disclosed and did not practice, I think, at all over the weekend. But they say not worried about him, just kind of day-to-day. He'll be back sooner rather than later. Byron Pringle, they specifically say quad injury, no timetable for return. We don't know the extent of the injury. Matt Eberflus indicated that he doesn't think it will last into the regular season, that they're expecting to have Byron Pringle for week 1 at the very latest, but it could take him out of a lot of the rest of training camp and preseason. I think more week to week than day to day for Byron Pringle, which is obviously a very big issue. But if you just look at like yesterday's practice, Sunday, the list of players that were not at practice included, that did not practice. Not that they weren't there, they just did not participate in practice. Kyler Gordon, Duke Shelley, Tavon Young. We got at wide receiver N'Keal Harry, Velus Jones, Byron Pringle. Then you got, some of the backup guys like Noah Dawkins, Julian Davenport, defensive end Al-Qadim Muhammad, wide receiver Dante Pettis, DT Angelo Blackson. And of course, that's also on top of Roquan Smith, still not practicing, Lucas Patrick, obviously we just talked about, and the cornerback Thomas Graham still remains out at Chicago Bears practice. So if you put together a few things there out of this list, one, Kyler Gordon was playing your slot cornerback spot. He's out. So Tavon Young would be normally playing your slot cornerback spot. He's out. Duke Shelley, also kind of an option there for your slot cornerback spot. He's out. Thomas Graham Jr., the other one competing in that slot cornerback spot. None of the four of them practiced this on Sunday and have been missing practice. And so with all of those guys not practicing, the Bears put in an undrafted rookie free agent with the first team nickel, Jalen Jones from Mississippi. Not a guy I know much about at all. I mean, as an undrafted free agent this year, but it says a lot about him that, yes, there's a handful of players ahead of him who are all out, but they chose one of the few undrafted rookie free agents, might be the only current rookie undrafted free agent the Bears have at cornerback, that they put him in with the starters at nickel over some of the other guys that have been around a little bit, or at least around the league a little bit, and have been practicing ahead of Jalen Jones in practice so far. Bo Pete Keys and Lamar Jackson, Michael Joseph just got back to practice, some of those guys. And it's Jalen Jones, the undrafted rookie. So keep an eye on him if he's getting some first-team reps here, albeit due to injury, but strong practice squad candidate guy there, and maybe he could push for that 5th or 6th cornerback spot on the depth chart if they think he can be a reliable option for them in the slot. That's always an encouraging sign for a player like that to emerge. Similar kind of trend at wide receiver, right? You're missing all your main guys besides Darnell Mooney and Equanimous St. Brown, but no Byron Pringle, no Velus Jones. N'Keal Harry and Dante Pettis also missed practice. Harry suffered a high ankle sprain, and Ian Rappaport from NFL Network reported that he's going to go see a specialist and might miss 6 weeks, which would take you through week 1, right? 6 weeks. I don't know the exact math on that. It'd be week 2 or week 3 from right now. So likely done for the rest of training camp in the preseason with that injury, which really hurts his chances of making this 53-man roster as a guy the Bears just traded a future 7th-round pick to bring in, kind of a reclamation project, but now really tough for him. Maybe the Bears could get away with just throwing him on injured reserve or the physically unable to perform list at the start of the season. Then you could stash him for 6 weeks, or maybe you just stash him for the whole year and bring him back next year and try again, but then his contract will be up and it'll be a kind of a thing there. But obviously that redemption story for now seems to be, we'll say, on pause, if not over for his time with the Chicago Bears. So that's a bummer. In their place with all those guys, Dante Pettis had been one of the kind of lesser heralded receivers on this team who had been stepping up, given some expanded opportunities. But with no Pringle, no Velus Jones, no N'Keal Harry, and no Pettis, obviously it's Mooney and Equanimous St. Brown is kind of your top two there. But the name that has also emerged as a playmaker in all those absences, as the sort of similar to Jalen Jones on defense, on offense it's been Tajay Sharp, the former 5th-round pick, I believe, by the Tennessee Titans, who's bounced around quite a bit. Another one of these bigger body, 6'2", 190 type receivers here, who has had a few flashes here and there, but never really, stuck to be able to do like consistent year-to-year production. But all of a sudden in Chicago seems to be finding some opportunities at these practices to make a little name for himself and push for these last few wide receiver spots on this Bears depth chart, because it's kind of an open thing now, especially with N'Keal Harry gone. We know it's Mooney, Pringle, St. Brown, Velus Jones are your top 4 in some order. And then, it's Pettis pushing, it's Sharp pushing, it's Daz Newsome pushing in there, David Moore. Those kind of seem to be the main players at this point with N'Keal Harry out of that mix. And I think that's totally open for 2 of those guys to stick on the roster. Special teams will have to be a big part of that contribution. And in the preseason, we'll see who gets those opportunities there and emerges to be that sort of end of your wide receiver depth chart type guy. But just interesting developments for a couple of new players emerging at cornerback and wide receiver with injuries there. And now, Braxton Jones was among those who was injured on the offensive line. They had, Cody Whitehair getting some days, some veteran time off, Julian Davenport also. So they were getting a lot of different guys mixed in including Sean Coleman, who I mentioned earlier, on the offensive line as well. So keep an eye on some of these emerging guys. Certainly, once we get to a preseason game, we'll check in on all of their performances and figure out who's going to win some of these battles. So I hope you'll keep tuning in and hit that subscribe button for the Locked On Bears podcast to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Hopefully you'll come back tomorrow and each and every day to get your daily opportunity to bear down.